Thanks again for the opportunity. I think it was a few years ago here when we were here that we kind of launched the service. So it's I suppose good to be back. Right. So I suppose one of the things I want to do is just acknowledge the partners. It is a partnership. It's a whole of government and industry approach. So I just want to acknowledge the partners. And in particular, I suppose, to acknowledge the two government departments, Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, who kind of went out on a limb a little bit to establish this, and it took a little bit of courage to do that. It was a new approach at an international level, and I think it's been really appreciated that they've done that. And I also just want to thank two other, what I would consider partners or supporters in the whole process that have made it possible. And that is the EPA, and a number of your staff in particular have been hugely supportive of us. But the other is the farm organisations, without whom we couldn't have implemented the programme. And they have been supportive with us right throughout the process. So just for those of you who maybe aren't familiar, I just very quickly just look at, well, what is ASSAP? And it's the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Service. And our focus is on improving water quality in the priority areas for action and providing a free advisory service. And at this point, we've 33 advisors, 20 with Teagasc, and 13 now in the dairy co-op, and that's increasing to shortly to 18. And we work in collaboration with LawPro. And I suppose just what I might do is just, if I just tee it up, rather than me explaining what the service does, I'm going to have a short video to let a number of the advisors explain what they do.
The Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Programme, also known as ASSAP, is a free, confidential and voluntary service to all farmers in priority areas for action. 20 advisors from Teagasc and 10 advisors from the dairy co-ops will work together with farmers across the country to improve water quality. As a start, 190 areas for action have been selected where water quality needs some improvement. The aim is to achieve a minimum of good status in all our water bodies.
When starting work in an area, locals will be invited to a community meeting by the Local Authority Waters Programme to discuss the programme and update people on the quality of river in their local area. Following this, ASSAP advisors will invite all local farmers to a meeting to discuss the free, confidential and voluntary service available and how it works. When on a farm visit, ASSAP advisors will discuss the nutrient management planning, farmyard losses and land management.
ASSAP advisors are supported by catchment scientists from the Local Authority Waters Programme. The catchment scientists will assess rivers in priority areas for action and identify issues that might relate to agricultural losses, sharing this information with the ASSAP advisors. A priority area for action is an area of land, often parish size, where a river runs through it and the land in the area drains into it.
ASSAP's group of experienced advisors will work together with farmers, using the local knowledge on the ground to come up with a plan. Small changes on the farm can make a big difference to water quality.
Okay, thanks. So just I'll just get into a little bit more detail on how they work. Sorry, yeah, that moved on a bit. Okay, so as was explained, the work of the ASSAP advisors is based around the catchments assessment provided by our colleagues in LawPro, and I just have a little slide. They'll be talking, I think, later in the conference about their work. That we are provided with a catchment characterization from LawPro, but also very specific referrals as to what are particular problems in the catchment. Those are then taken on board by the advisors who work with the farmers in the catchment to try and identify on those farms what are the potential problems relating to the issues that have been observed, and the next step is to put in place a plan at farm level for what actions need to be taken by the farmer. That's then followed up by follow-up visits, and then, I suppose, a process of compilation of data to feed back to LawPro and back, I suppose, to the water community in general as to what's going on there. In terms of the identification of the issues at farm level, we categorise them into a number of different risk categories. And you see figures there in terms of the work with the advisors, what numbers are in there, and I'll just nuance that a little bit. So we identify high-risk issues, which are issues which we consider to be highly likely to have a high impact on water quality in the catchment. Medium risk then, which are likely to have a moderate impact on water quality, and low risk. And the numbers of low risk seem very low there, and it is, because in a lot of cases the advisors are focusing on the high risk and not necessarily on so many of the low risk. If you were to do a full assessment, there would be a lot more of those. So in terms of the assessment, the three areas, as I think Cathal mentioned, that we focus on are around the farmyard. So, and in the farmyard, what we're really looking at is storage facilities for manures, storage facilities for feeds, particularly silage, losses from exposed areas, and then other issues like potential for pesticides, and sheepdip, etc. So it's a full assessment of risk, and in particular a focus on the connectivity of the farmyard to the waterway, because if there isn't that connectivity, you probably don't have as high a risk, but in some cases you get that very high connectivity. Second area is around land management, and this is around a kind of the physical piece of the land where there are risks, and in particular looking at the risk of loss of phosphorus through overland flow, the risk of leaching of nitrogen, and then a whole series of issues around the landscape issues like access to water by animals, farm roadways, and a whole series of issues there that are examined by the advisors. And the third area then that's focused on is nutrient management practice. And it's not just about the level of nutrient going on, it's about the management of that nutrient, the timing of it, the placing of it, etc. So a lot of work going in to trying to educate farmers. You'll have heard, I suppose, the thing about nutrients, right nutrient, right place, right time. Well, it's a lot of focus around the latter two. So there's a significant number of potential issues that are raised, and then there's a series of mitigation actions that are suggested by the advisors, and that goes into the plan for the farmer. Just, I suppose, a quick update on work to the end of last year. We had over 2,500 farms visited. Just over 500 of those revisited, and I suppose the focus on a lot of the visits were on the cases where there were significant issues identified. There's also been, I suppose, a degree of cross-pollination. So we have in Teagasc a signpost program which is predominantly around greenhouse gases, but the advisors are working across programs to some degree, and I suppose making sure that water quality issues are taken on board in broader programs and particularly sustainability programs. So those signpost farm programs, that's 117 demonstration farms, predominantly on greenhouse gases, but the advisors have gone in and carried out assessments on those farms in conjunction with our colleagues again in LawPro to characterise any issues, so that we can use those farms as a demonstration platform for water quality as well. The process of farmer meetings, there's 137 of those have taken place. And at that point we were active in 122 of the catchments. That's gone up since. Very strong engagement with farmers to the approach, that farmers, when it's presented in this way and when we are going in with the backing of the farm organisations, we are getting a very strong engagement initially, and then agreement to take on measures. So just looking at some of the other features around it, the areas in which, the issues that are being identified in the catchments. The biggest one there you'll see is in relation to P loss, less so in relation to N loss, and that's a little bit about the areas we're operating in, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Sedimentation, huge issue. Point source losses identified again in a significant number of catchments, and also a number where there's toxicity and pesticides, and particularly some areas where sheep dip was a problem, and again a number of areas where ammonium is a problem in particular landscapes. There's a mix of farm enterprises of the assessments carried out, as would be expected, slightly higher dairy than the general proportion, and that's partly down to the fact that the dairy co-ops are heavily involved in it. And then just some of the issues, and again, I don't expect you to get into detail on reading these slides, but just to get some sort of a flavour, the biggest issue that we're coming across is P loss through overland flow, and connected to that then the implementation and not a poor implementation of nutrient management on the farm. And some of the others then in relation to drinking points. So there's a series of a broad range of issues being identified individually on farms. And again, I don't expect you to take all of that in, but it's just to give, I suppose, a setting for some of the mitigation actions that we're putting in place. So just, I suppose, to give a flavour for some of the things that are arising from it. This is a case where there was problems with grey water coming from the farmyard, and some problems with the roadway you see in the picture, where there was problems with the flowing down to a point. So what was put in place was a series of chambers to allow a sediment to settle within it to try and alleviate some of the issues there. This was an area where just wrong timing, farmers going out in a particular area with slurry, and a month later this is what happened, and the problems associated with that. So again, it's about the placement, getting people to avoid those risks that have been identified. This is just a case of just an overland flow going straight into a drain, and what was done was they used a certain amount of the material that was taken from it to create a bank, to create, if you want, a bund to prevent the water, reseeded it, and put fencing in place to prevent water flowing in. And again, these are just some of the quick examples. This was a case of a problem with a roadway, again, where there was a runoff, and what was done was a point to intercept it, and that interception point was directed into an area that was then planted with willow to use up any nutrient that was coming down that line. So just, I suppose, again, we characterize as we assess things as to what's been happening in relation to the implementation of the measures, and I'll just take a little bit of time just to focus on some of the measures, because I think there are some significant consequences and outcomes from some of the findings we have in relation to what we do next. So we look at, these are the kind of a range of the issues that are observed, and what I've focused on here in the next, I suppose, two little moves forward on this are the areas where we've had very high uptake of measures, and some of the areas where there's lower uptake. And and again, I don't expect you to see all of these, but if you look at them, it's quite clear that the areas where there's significant investment involved are the ones that are slowest. And I mean, you'd say that's total common sense, that the farmers will take on board and have been very good at taking on board practice changes that don't necessarily cost a whole lot, but the other ones where there's maybe significant investment or significant workload involved, they're a bit slower to implement. And that comes back to the incentive for us to look at putting in place the measure Leanne mentioned in relation to a fund to try and tackle these measures. So I think it's given us an evidence base to point policy in the right direction. So again, not going into detail on these, but there's a whole range of actions that are being put in place, and we're tracking very closely the degree to which those are being implemented or not being implemented, to try and improve our ability to get implementation on the ground, or even in some cases to focus on the things that have a better chance of being implemented. They mightn't be the best option, but if a second best option implemented 80% of the time might be better than a best option only implemented 20% of the time. So we're using this data to learn as we go along. So I'm not going to spend any more time on it. Just a summary then of some of the issues and the outcomes of the service. COVID-19 had impacted on us up to now. There's no point in saying it slowed us down massively in terms of getting out to farmers and working with them was our job. That wasn't able to happen. But we have had very strong engagement with farmers. The pressures and issues that we're coming across are consistent with what I suppose we would have expected. The mitigation actions that we need to continue to work with farmers on that, and I suppose one of the learnings is that the speed at which we would get in and out of a catchment and get change as we had initially envisaged it is going to take longer. There's more required moving back with the farmers on an ongoing basis. I suppose a general recommendation that we are getting positive implementation at ground level, but there's a lot more required to get us where we need to go. I'll just look at three potential developments very quickly. The renewal of the service in the Third River Basin Management Plan as part of that, and the two departments have pretty much agreed to renew the service for another period, so we're going into another 5-year period, and I think that's a great positive. Something that arose out of, I suppose, a resource mismatch in a way, and a little bit of a problem, and it's turned out, I suppose, to be something very positive. The dairy co-ops have agreed to put in place an extra 8 advisors, but there was a concern there with the speed at which referrals were coming through. And there was also an issue around the initial characterization of the PAs were largely in areas where there was phosphorus problems and Q-value problems, but not necessarily in areas where there were nitrates problems. So what we've done is we've put in place an additional referral process in relation to a series of nitrates vulnerable catchments. So what this does is it gives us a bigger workload, obviously, but it also gets the service moving into those areas where nitrates is a problem. And I have to be hugely complimentary to LawPro in terms of this, because we went to them earlier in this year with this as a potential, and they come back to us with a characterization of over 1,200 catchments to go into this category in the space of a couple of months. So work is now starting, much more intensive work in those nitrates area. And the third area of development is what Leanne mentioned, a water quality initiative. Whether it's an EIP or not, we don't know. Sorry, I'll just go on for this. I've dealt with that. Sorry, that's in relation to the areas that were identified as nitrates vulnerable. So we have this committed funding, so we're now looking at how we will use that funding and prioritise that funding to pay for those issues at farm level that are the ones that we're having difficulty getting implemented. So this is where this funding comes in. We're at the early stages of designing this process, but there's a couple of principles that have been agreed that we will be open on an ongoing basis, and that it will be a priority in areas where there are already water quality initiatives going on. Not just the PAA, but any other water quality initiative that might be in place, that this would be there to support them in a priority before it goes to a broader farming group. So really appreciative of the support of the two departments in putting this fund in place, and I think it can be it can have a huge impact. Final thing, just the couple of things that came up. We've already seen the picture this morning. There was a mention of, I think, Lough Ennell and some of the work that was done there. But I suppose one of the things we're trying to do is to use the ASSAP service to influence other areas of advisory work to make sure that we're integrating to a huge degree into that. And I think the existence of within the co-op structure and within Teagasc of that number of water quality advisors is having if you want, a multiplier effect in terms of the impact going forward. So they're just the second one was just one of the advisors at Prince Charles' visit, and he was explaining the work of the ASSAP program and doing as he was trained to do by some of our colleagues, he was doing his kick sample. So listen, thank you very much, and I'll leave it at that.